I don't think it will happen either, because I think if there was any move towards doing it, there'll be a massive revolt inside the Conservative Party itself, particularly led by a group of soon-to-be former ministers, Philip Hammond, David Gauke, people of this kind, who've made it very, very clear that they're not prepared to tolerate it. It requires the Queen issuing a royal proclamation that would bring the Queen into politics in a way we haven't seen at any time in recent history. It would have to be done for 2 whole months, because he would have to suspend Parliament for the September session and for the 3 weeks before we're supposed to be leaving in October. As soon as you go through it, it's utterly unthinkable. I think it's almost certainly going to become illegal. I mean, at the moment, it will break everyone's understandings of the Constitution at the moment. But I think it will become literally illegal over the last week, because the ever excellent Dominic Grieve, and by the way, I think he has been absolutely wonderful the last 2 years in terms of the whole mastery of parliamentary procedure and all that, through amendments actually, because he's endlessly creative, through amendments which were passed to a bill concerning Northern Ireland this week, he has taken the first steps towards making what's called prorogation. This is the legal term for it, the constitutional term for it, which is suspending the sitting of Parliament even between general elections. He's taken the first steps towards making it illegal. That bill goes to the House of Lords next week. We will certainly insert all of the other provisions which are needed to make it illegal. I'd be very surprised if they're not carried in the House of Commons afterwards. So I think doing a belt and braces job, it will actually be illegal by the time that Parliament rises for the summer recess in 2 weeks' time, as well as being unconstitutional. So I don't think it will happen. John Bercow has made very clear that one way or another, if Parliament wants to rule out no deal and call a referendum in October, it will find a way of doing so. Just as it did in March, when Yvette Cooper and Oliver Letwin came together and enacted a bill which was passed, which actually made no deal then illegal and legally required the government to apply for an extension. I think we'll be in the same position in October. It's a terrible position to be in. It could well be last-minute brinkmanship like last time. It's no way to run a country like ours. But to the question, might we go to the extremity of literally banning Parliament from meeting and doing the whole thing by royal decree, which is essentially how he'd have to leave the EU. Otherwise, I simply don't think that's going to happen. On the issue of should we have confidence that we can actually win this and all of that, I'm a professional optimist, but there's very good reason for being optimistic. Every time there's been a Brexit vote in Parliament so far on any Brexit deal, it's been defeated. Every time there's been a vote on a referendum, the majority has got smaller and smaller against. And it hasn't come to the crunch yet, because last time we were able to extend at the end of March with an agreement with our European partners without having any alternative policy at all, which was very good of them. Do you remember Donald Tusk told us not to waste the time?
Yes, he did.
So Theresa May immediately sent Parliament on holiday, and then the Conservatives decided to replace their leader and have a 3-month election campaign. So I don't know what definition of time wasting he had in mind, but I think this satisfies it in all respects. But I don't think that they're again going to agree to an extension with no policy whatever for doing anything. So we'll have to agree to something that we're going to do. And as I say, Sherlock Holmes, when you've eliminated the impossible, you're left with the improbable. I think that by process of elimination, that's where we will come to. And then, sorry, I've momentarily forgotten your third question. So can you prompt me? What was it?
Move towards a federal state.
Oh, the federal state.
Oh, yeah.
What
would be your answer?
What would be my answer to it?
Yes,
yes, and it's a jolly good thing. Well, let's be clear. Federations come in 101 different sizes. It's absolutely true that the European Union is a kind of federation. It's exactly what Winston Churchill called for in his great Zurich speech of 1946, when he said to avoid war in Europe, we should create a kind of United States of Europe. He did not say we should replicate the United States of Europe with its much stronger central institutions. He didn't say that. He said we should create a kind of United States of Europe. That is what we have done with the European Union. And it's been a huge success. And what did he say? We should create a kind of United States of Europe, not they should create a kind of United States of Europe. The Brexiters have been busy rewriting Churchill. There is no reading of Churchill which has him favouring us leaving the European Union, which he did more to inspire than any other single person in the 1940s and the 1950s. It was his Zurich speech and the leadership he gave as the first president of the Council of Europe, and indeed his work, the book I'm writing at the moment, is called 1949, on the creation of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949. The Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, created in 1949, was very substantially a British creation. Very substantially. And it was a British creation begun by Winston Churchill, who decided in 1945 that we were going to seek to reintroduce democracy into Germany and effectively working economic institutions and all of that, rather than what a lot of people wanted to do, which was a kind of Versailles deal that would have massive reparations and would seek to break up Germany and keep it down. That was Churchill's vision. And what he then saw wasn't only a democratic and prosperous Germany, but a democratic and prosperous Germany at peace with France, which was a revolutionary idea at the time, because that had never happened in the previous 500 years, and all of them coming together in a kind of United States of Europe. And the reason I say all this now is I know that there are some people who sort of a bit of an intake of breath when you use terms like federation and federalism and confederalism and all that. But you know, I think part of the reason why we're in this mess at the moment is we haven't been honest enough about what's been happening in Europe. And in particular, those of us who are pro-Europeans haven't defended the fact that this Europe is a huge success. It's not a failure. What would you prefer? That we have no relations with our European partners at all, and that we go back to the 1930s, where everything is done at the end of a barrel of a gun, and we have rival ideologies. That failed. It led to massive bloodshed. It's why one of the largest organisations which operates that Britain has on the continent is the Commonwealth War Graves Commission at the moment. We do not want to go back to that. And so I have no difficulty at all defending it, and we should defend it ourselves. What is it we want? We want Europe. We don't want no Europe. That is what we stand for. It's why we are called, though many of us here who are campaigning, the European movement. It's what Churchill stood for. It's what the Conservative Party used to stand for when it was in its Churchill phase rather than its Boris Johnson phase. And it's what we should be defending to the hilt. And if we win the argument for a Europe that works, then I think we will at long last lay the ghost of Brexit to rest, which is this myth that somehow we are better off by isolating ourselves from the continent, pretending that we still have an empire, which some of the Brexiters may have noticed actually went 50 years ago, doesn't exist. You cannot turn the clock back. I know Jacob still thinks it's there. He's just written a book about it, which has been widely panned, where he seems to think we can transplant ourselves back to the Victorian age and everything will be fine. That is the past. It's great to understand the past. I'm a historian. It's lovely to write about it. We should not be living in it, though, as a country. We should learn the lessons of the past. Lesson number one of the past is get on with our European partners and do what Churchill said, which is jaw rather than war. Yeah. That's what this European federalism is about. It works, and we shouldn't be. And then just a final point on it too. If we are misguided enough to leave the European Union, and it will be a terrible mistake, and my view is that we'd end up going back in again in 10, 15, 20 years' time, so we'll just put ourselves through a massive national trauma. Our children's generation will inevitably take us back in again. If we do that, the European Union, this kind of United States of Europe, is not going to go away. The other 27, I'm not going to say, oh, that Brexit thing is a great example to us. I can assure you, I meet my European parliamentarians and ministers all the time at the moment. It is now the golden rule of European politics that thou shalt not do any form of Brexit. Indeed, the populist parties of Europe, which were all busy saying what a good thing Brexit was a few years ago when they saw it as a revolt against these liberal elites and all of that. Liberal elites, by the way. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson. I mean, give me a break. I mean, it is a complete farce. But they've all now changed their tune. Now, Madame Le Pen in France is not calling for Frexit. She knows she would absolutely lose an election if she started saying we should copy those Anglo-Saxons and do a French Brexit. Salvini is not calling for Italy to leave the European Union. Orbán, who is I'm afraid is the cutting edge of European populism, and that is a real warning signal as to what can happen to European democracy if we don't hold together as European democracies. He is emphatically not calling for Hungary to leave the European Union. Why is he not doing it? The one surefire way of him being evicted from power immediately in Hungary is if he gives up all of the European subsidies that have helped rebuild Eastern Europe and exposes himself to the Russian bear, which is only 50 miles away. None of them are going to be leaving the European Union. The European Union has never been so popular across the other member states of the EU. Indeed, actually, in Britain, as it happens, which is the height of irony, as it is now, and that what is happening as a result of Brexit is a massive reinforcement of European solidarity, not a weakening. And the one surefire way now of losing an election anywhere across the continent of Europe is to say that you intend to copy Britain and do a version of leaving the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
But if we just get on with it, then we can put all this behind us. I say to him when I go on his programme, I'm in favour of getting on with it too. Just get on with the referendum. Let's get this whole thing finished as soon as we reasonably can, democratically. And the right thing to do is to take the decision to hold the referendum, to do it, and then we can end Brexit once and for all. Because the one thing that ensures that we will not resolve it is by proceeding with some form of Brexit. Because it doesn't resolve it at all. All that we would be agreeing to if we did no deal, which is a complete misnomer, because no deal simply means a different form of deal. If we literally did no deal, the ports close, no planes take off, we have 6 weeks of medical supplies, remember all those things we were told last year. So that's not going to happen. What would happen is a breakdown in negotiations leading to further negotiations. So if we go on with Brexit, the only thing that is certain is that we're going to spend the next 10, 15, 20 years in ceaseless trade and diplomatic and political negotiations for the arrangements that are going to be needed to replace our membership of the European Union. The only thing that just gets on with it and resolves the Brexit issue, means that we can move on, is not to do Brexit, which means the referendum and then we can revoke. So we just need to be making that argument very, very clearly, that either no deal or any form of deal like Theresa May's is a process, it's not an event. It means that we then have years of ongoing negotiations, legislation that needs to be passed, and so on, which means that we're not going to be able to move on to other issues. Now, what is it that we then do in order to try and unite the country? And there's no point soft-soaping it. The country is very divided. It's going to be a difficult situation until we've resolved it. Well, you cannot split the difference between remaining and not remaining in the European Union. I mean, it's as simple as that. We have got to take a decision. We are a democracy. We should, in my view, take making people's lives better rather than them getting worse, which has been their experience of the last 10 years. Then that would address what was the biggest cause of people voting for Brexit, which wasn't to do with wanting, in some esoteric way, to leave this European quasi-federation, but was actually to do with the fact that there aren't enough good jobs. There aren't enough good opportunities for young people, particularly those who aren't going to university, which has been a massive problem in our society, particularly places more remote from London. There aren't enough homes, and our public services are getting worse and not getting better. So what we need is referendum, revoke, reform, and the last of those R's is just as important as the first two. We don't stop with revoke. That needs to be then the beginning of a big process of national renewal and reform, tackling those very issues that led people to vote to leave the European Union 3 years ago. It tells what the views of Labour are here in Ipswich. But I've been travelling up and down the country over the last year, and can I tell you, the overwhelming majority of members of the Labour Party are pro-European and want to stay in the EU and favour a second referendum. Overwhelming. The overwhelming majority of Labour members of Parliament are pro-EU, want a second referendum, and want to remain in the EU. And it's not just Labour members of Parliament in areas that voted Remain. Most Labour members of Parliament in places that voted Leave also favour staying in the European Union. This is a complete myth, which is put about by those people who basically want Brexit, that somehow Labour is dead in areas where there was a majority for Leave if we favour remaining. That's not true at all. In my experience, what people expect from their members of Parliament is to tell them the truth and stand up on big points of principle when it comes to big issues of this kind. And making the argument for a referendum, which I do all the time going up and down the country, answers completely this point about what do you have to say to people who voted Leave. People who voted Leave, whether it's in Bournemouth or in Barnsley will have exactly the same vote as people who voted Remain 3 years ago. And remember, the people cannot betray the people. In my experience, people by and large do want to have a say on what happens with this Brexit thing, whether they voted Leave or Remain. So there isn't a problem with the Labour Party on this Brexit argument. The problem, to be absolutely blunt, is with well, not even the leadership, because that implies a collective. The problem, let's be completely blunt about it, is the leader. I mean, it is one person. Now, let me tell you one or two things about my friend Jeremy. And we do get on fine because we have a very, very strong bond. The strongest bond that two Englishmen can have in common, which is that we're both train spotters. We're serious train spotters. Very serious train spotters, because whereas I only buy Railway magazine when I've got a long train journey at W.H. Smith, he subscribes. I mean, he's literally, I mean, he knows railway timetables in even more minute detail than I do. Jeremy is not a natural pro-European. He voted against joining in the mid-1970s. He voted against all of the treaties since then, up to and including the Lisbon Treaty. There's no secret about that. It's a matter of record and it's his view. But he's been on a journey. He knows that, as Nigel Lawson famously said after the 2016 referendum, Brexit is the chance to complete the Thatcher revolution, in a famous article in the Financial Times, which is the reason why this has been all the way through the project of the far right. This isn't largely about, actually, the powers of Brussels. For most of the people who believe in Brexit, this is a Thatcherite social and economic project to dismantle economic, social and workers' regulation. That's what it's predominantly about. He's come to realise that over time, and he has moved successively. Every time there's been a vote in the House of Commons on any deal that does involve trashing the economy, which is any deal, he's voted against it. The last 3 times that we've had votes in the House of Commons on a referendum, he's voted for it. Our problem with Jeremy hasn't been actually to get him to vote the right way every time you get a fork in the road, because he has done that. What we haven't been able to do is to get him out there saying he himself is a passionate pro-European. We haven't been able to get him to say that yet. Can I let you into a secret? I don't think we're going to get to that point. I don't think we're going to get to the point where Jeremy waxes eloquent about Europe and the European Union as an entity. What we will do, which is what matters, because we're a broad church, is we will get him to vote for the referendum. He's already done that. To vote against any fantasy deal, he's already done that. To recognise that there isn't going to be some fantasy deal under a Labour government either. He's not absolutely quite there at the moment, but he's almost there. He'll be there before long. Once that happens, Labour will be the agent, as it has been so far, as part of this broad Remain coalition, which includes the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Scottish and the Welsh Nationalists, and so on, which is going to bring about a second referendum and campaign for Remain. And then there are lots of other my colleagues in the Labour leadership who will be the, as it were, the Praetorian Guard then when we can go into the referendum campaign. People like Hilary Benn, people like Yvette Cooper. There are a lot of people who've been making these arguments alongside very, very good people who've been making the arguments in the other parties. Caroline Lucas, I think she's fantastic. She's been doing a great job. I never thought I'd hear myself say it. I think Nicola Sturgeon has been brilliant in making the argument on behalf of the SNP and whoever is the leader of the Liberal Democrats. So I'm absolutely confident that we can bring this coalition together. The coalition which campaigns for a referendum and for Remain will include the Labour Party. And if we don't have Jeremy Corbyn making speeches which are Churchillian about the cause of European unity, he will nonetheless be there in favour of Remain, and that's going to be a big part of how we win this as a Remain coalition. And on the points which the user made about emotional arguments, I completely agree. I absolutely agree. It's people's hearts that govern, and emotions that govern how they behave. It's not arid facts, and we need to be making those arguments all the time. And in particular, it's not just about Europe as a peace project, which I think is hugely important. We also need, if I can move into another area, I think it's hugely important we start making emotional and not narrow factual arguments. It's also about migration too. People have come to understand in the last 3 years that this argument that was being made by the Brexiters and the hard right before, about immigration, plays both ways. this thing called freedom of movement works both ways. It's not just about other EU citizens being able to come here, it's crucially also about Brits being able to live, love, work, travel and forge their lives on the continent as well. And the two go hand in hand. We are not going to be able to travel and live and work and settle freely across the rest of Europe unless we allow the same rights to other Europeans to come here. This is what Europe is about. It's a two-way process. And if we start becoming insular and xenophobic vis-à-vis the rest of Europe, the same will happen to them when it comes to dealing with Brits. And also, a country which starts trashing foreigners is not a country which I or anyone who cares about liberal values should ever want to be a part of.
Right.
Even in the most difficult area, which was immigration is I think by playing a big and much more emotional argument about how the rights that we expect the rest of Europe to observe vis-à-vis us and our children when it comes to them being able to live and work across Europe are exactly the same rights that we therefore have to respect when it comes to other Europeans coming here. You cannot have your cake and eat it, to coin a phrase. And as people come to realise that, and as we make those arguments, I'm convinced that we can win this in the second referendum.
I may not be the best person to speak on behalf of the Ipswich Labour Party, and I'm not sure they would necessarily welcome me doing so. But I did want to say that it was a great relief to me that my good friend Sandy Martin is currently the Labour Member of Parliament for Ipswich, because he is passionate about our membership of the European Union and has been very committed to telling his position very clearly through the media, despite the fact that they, tried to say, well, more people voted to leave in Ipswich than voted to remain. So I welcome that. That's his position, and I sense that the majority of the party members in Ipswich are Remain supporters. And I know that during the previous campaign there was active organisation from within Labour in Ipswich to support the Remain campaign, and that's probably as much as I can.
So there you have it. I did vote Labour in the European elections because I voted for myself. So I thought I was the best candidate in Labour. But how can I say this without jeopardising my membership of my party? Of course, the electorate being sensible and people making judgments of how they can maximise their vote, of course, including members of my party, often decide that the best thing to do is to vote tactically. They did it in the European elections. They've done it from time immemorial in general elections, because we have a first-past-the-post electoral system, and we have individual constituencies. People whose party is third or fourth have constantly had to make decisions about whether or not they're going to vote tactically in order to keep out the party that they most dislike, and I'm sure the same will happen. In Richmond upon Thames last time, I'm told that there were fewer Labour votes than there were members of the Labour Party there in order to try and get Zach Goldsmith out. They didn't quite succeed, but this happens up and down the country. Sometimes it benefits Labour, sometimes it benefits the Lib Dems, in one or two places it benefits the Greens. All I'm going to say is we're all grown-ups here, we know it happens, and that people need to make judgments as to what they think is in the best interests of their communities and their country when they cast their votes. It's a step beyond that, of course, to have an electoral alliance that means that parties actually stand down. Now, I'll be completely frank and open. I am not in principle against that in a time of national emergency. Indeed, my party, the Labour Party, wouldn't have even got into Parliament if it wasn't for the fact that it had an electoral pact with the Liberals before the First World War, which got us into Parliament. It was called the Gladstone-MacDonald Pact, and the Liberals stood down in about 60 seats, allowing Labour to fight the Conservatives, which is why the Labour Party got going as a parliamentary party in the first place. I don't myself think that we should be closed-minded about it. Myself, if we're in a national emergency, particularly if we face a Johnson-Farage electoral pact, which I think is distinctly possible in a general election. And my view is if there's a Johnson-Farage electoral pact where, I mean, not to be unduly emotive about it, but there's some elements of fighting fascism, which we're then going to start seeing in this country, my view is that the parties which are unashamedly in favour of liberal democracy and staying in the EU, we should also come together. Whether that means an electoral pact or whether it means some kind of common programme, I think we should maturely and openly discuss, and we shouldn't rule out any options in advance. So does that give you my answer to your question?
Well done.
There's also a particular tactical reason why I think my party should be in favour of it, which is the next Prime Minister, assuming it is going to be Mr Johnson, he has quite a marginal seat in Uxbridge in northwest London. His majority is only 5,000. If my friends in the Lib Dems and the Greens were very generously to stand down in Uxbridge and give the Labour Party a clear run against Boris Johnson, I think there's a very, very good chance he would lose his seats.
Yeah.
So, but we can't expect them to do that unless we're prepared to do it somewhere else. So, from small seeds are large things, I'm mixing my metaphors slightly, but you can see where this might be going. So I do think that's that we need to be very open to that. I've now, I'm afraid, forgotten. Okay, so should I answer to that question? I've forgotten the other two questions.
People voting to make themselves poorer.
Yeah. Well, of course, they didn't vote to make themselves poorer, and they're not going to, I believe, next time. The crucial thing is, last time, it's very important to understand when people say that people are prepared to vote, make sacrifices if we're kind of Dunkirk for Brexit. I don't believe that's true. It may be that Jacob Rees-Mogg is prepared to take a 1 or 2% hit on his portfolio, which is moved to Dublin as a result of Brexit. But people whose jobs and livelihoods and the future of their families are at stake, that's not the case. What happened last time is the reason why the facts are important alongside the emotion, is people did swallow this idea that we were actually going to be better off as a result of Brexit. And that's not just me saying so. All of the research which was done on why people voted to leave last time, the two biggest issues on why they voted to leave, the two biggest issues were immigration and getting our money back. Crucially, this 350 million on the side of the bus was hugely important to people voting leave. They thought there were these shed loads of money that were going to the EU, which we were going to get back. So being able to counter that with, it's by the way, part of the reason why I'm so critical of the BBC. The BBC should have been calling out the lies in the last referendum.
Yes.
Impartial public broadcaster doesn't mean that you give equal time to the truth and the lies. It means you call out the lies in the name of the truth. That is what it's about. So I do actually think that the facts this time, because the facts now are being clearly established, because we've got the experience of the last 3 years, and in particular we've got the experience of the actual negotiation that took place with the EU, I think we can marshal those, but alongside the emotion. And as I say, on the immigration side, there are more facts. It's now a fact that there's more immigration that comes into this country from outside the EU than inside. So if we're really just concerned about numbers coming into the country, then we can do it without needing to leave the EU. But it's also, of course, a fact that there are 1 million Brits who live, work and actually are settled on the continent, and all of their futures are going to be in jeopardy immediately if we stop freedom of movement. And it's also a fact that if you have different immigration systems in the Republic of Ireland from Northern Ireland, then you have got to have some form of hard border. These are all now facts. So it's the facts alongside the emotion that's important. And I've forgotten the third question.
The other one was the lady asking, how do you make more visible what the EU is?
Oh yes. Oh, how do you make more visible? Well, it's a very good test actually. Constituency by constituency, town by town, what has Europe done for us? We need to be doing that. But can I give an immediate example I would do if we were doing a meeting which had people who wanted to know in this hall this evening? The University of Suffolk. I'd be astonished if this wonderful building, which is fairly recent, isn't it? I'd be astonished if there isn't EU funding here. But in universities up and down the country, including this university, typically between 1/4 and 1/3 of the staff at these universities come from other European countries. We benefit hugely. We have the most successful university system in Europe, and part of the reason why is because we have freedom of movement and academic staff who love to come to this country, partly because it's a wonderful place to be, but also we teach and and study in English. They all want to come here. So the first thing that will happen if we leave the EU and we stop freedom of movement is we are going to bankrupt our universities, and we are going to denude them of the biggest opportunity that they have for recruiting staff, which is other European Union citizens coming to here. So we can make these arguments. We need to make them in a very factual way next time, and I do agree with you, because we don't give credit to the EU by putting, posters and all that outside. We need to, next time, have leaflets and flyers and things that we can give out. What has Europe done for you? The following 10 things it's done here in Ipswich, and have the facts. Even when we've taken on phenomenal debts to fight successive wars, we've always honoured our debts. It's unthinkable that we would cease to do so now. And of course, we've become international pariahs if we did so. And whilst Donald Trump may be capable of being an international pariah because he's the United States of America, Britain, if we made ourselves international pariahs, the people who would suffer would be us. It wouldn't be the rest of the world. So that point is very, very well made. And people, of course, understand that. We can no more walk away from our debts than anybody who's renting a house or a flat can walk away from paying the rent. It might be a macho thing to do at the point when you say you're doing it, but the only person who suffers is you when you get evicted. So that isn't going to happen. On the point about should no deal be on the ballot, I feel this is a very difficult issue. The answer is, of course, Parliament will decide what's on the ballot. That's the answer. And my view is probably there will be a third option on the ballot, or maybe it's the only other option, some form of no deal, because if we have a referendum, the House of Commons will decide. There are a lot of Brexiters in the House of Commons, and I think probably the deal that will be done will be to have some hard Brexit option on the ballot. So it's probably going to happen. I'm not wildly keen on the idea. I'll tell you why I'm not. It's because it's a complete unicorn. The thing called no deal is literally impossible to do. It involves walking away from our 39 billion worth of debts. It involves having no legal regime for operating the ports, the transport systems, our customs, any of this. It's simply not going to happen. No deal is not no deal. It's a different deal. And it's a different deal which you have to start negotiating the day after you say you're not going to proceed with the existing deal. That's the reality. The reality is if we, on the 31st of October, on Halloween and all that, we decide we're leaving with no deal, we don't leave with no deal. What happens on the 1st of November is that we start negotiating, and it will probably take years, a different deal, and we have to have some kind of emergency arrangement with the EU, which will be effectively extending the negotiating period for the 4th time. That's what happens. Because we have to use different words to describe things because the previous words become unacceptable. Because Boris has given a commitment he won't extend. Presumably he will be elongating or something in the negotiating period. But it will still be the same thing. So I'm not keen on having more unicorns charging around the country called no deal. Particularly with Farage there, who will claim that his no deal is the answer to everything that you don't like about the deal. But we are where we are. We have to make the best of it. If that is on the ballot paper, then I'm absolutely convinced that we can defeat it this time, because this time we are the agents of truth against the lies. We're going to have the emotional arguments, not just the factual arguments. We're going to campaign in a wholly new way that we didn't last time. Our Remain coalition is much broader. It's going to include the Labour Party rather than us just going AWOL, which is unfortunately what happened 3 years ago. And crucially importantly, next time, the young are going to mobilise the young. They are going to come out in record numbers. Why? Because, as they said to me, we do not want to be shut up on a small island with Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. And that's what's going to win this referendum.
Months to go through this again, and remember everything you heard tonight.